The Dragon King ordered the lowborn thief executed at dusk. By sunset, his last dragon was shielding her cage with its wings. The iron cage stood in the center of the grand courtyard under the harsh midday sun. Nobles and soldiers gathered around it, their voices loud with mockery. Inside the cage stood a young woman named Seren. Her wrists were bound by heavy chains, her simple brown dress torn at the hem. At 28, she had spent her life quietly working as a healer's assistant in the lower city. She had never stolen anything, yet here she was, accused of taking a sacred dragon scale relic from the palace treasury. The relic had been found beneath her sleeping mat in the healer's quarters, wrapped in a cloth that looked exactly like the ones she used for her work. Lord Veric, keeper of the treasury, stood beside the platform, with the scale sealed inside a crystal box. He presented it to the crowd as irrefutable proof. Seren kept her head bowed. She did not beg. She did not cry. She simply endured. Dragon King Thorn Draconis stood on the raised platform, tall and imposing in black and gold robes. His silver eyes were cold as he looked down at the girl in the cage. "Drag her out before sunset and make her punishment a public warning," he commanded. "Let the people remember what happens to those who steal from the dragon throne." The guards bowed and began preparing the chains. As the sun began to sink, the guards approached the cage with spears. Their orders were clear: bring the girl out and make an example of her before the crowd. When the first guard reached for the lock, Seren finally lifted her chin. If she was going to die, she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crawl. But before the guard could open the cage door, a deep, thunderous roar split the sky. From above, a massive shadow descended. The last living dragon, Vaerith, landed in the center of the courtyard with earth-shaking force. Its obsidian scales gleamed like black fire, and its golden eyes burned with ancient fury. The ground cracked beneath its claws. The guards froze. The dragon moved slowly toward the iron cage. Its massive wings unfurled and curved protectively around the bars, wrapping around the cage like a living shield. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the air, not aimed at the girl inside, but at everyone else. Seren stood inside the cage, staring in disbelief, as the dragon's wing curved around her like a barrier of scales and heat. She did not know why the last dragon looked at her, as if it remembered a name she had never spoken aloud. She did not know why the old burn scar across her palm had begun to glow beneath the chains, and she did not know that inside the treasury, the stolen dragon scale relic had just cracked straight down the middle. Beside the platform, Lord Veric's face went pale as the crystal box in his hands vibrated once. Thorn Draconis rose slowly from his throne. His last dragon had not defended the crown. It had chosen the prisoner he had condemned. The courtyard remained deathly silent. Vaerith, the last dragon, kept its massive wings curled around the iron cage like a living fortress. Its golden eyes never left the guards, a low growl rumbling deep in its chest whenever anyone dared to take a step closer. The dragon's obsidian scales gleamed under the setting sun, and the heat radiating from its body made the iron bars warm to the touch. Seren stood inside, her chained hands resting against the bars. She could feel the dragon's presence surrounding her, not as a threat, but as something ancient and protective. The old burn scar on her palm continued to glow faintly beneath the chains. Dragon King Thorn Draconis remained standing on the platform, his silver eyes fixed on the scene before him. His last dragon had just defied the judgment of the dragon throne. Lord Veric stood frozen beside the platform, the crystal box clutched tightly in his hands. Thorn saw the movement as Veric subtly angled the box away from view. He said nothing, but his silver eyes narrowed. "Stand down," Thorn commanded. The guards hesitated, then slowly lowered their spears and stepped back. Thorn descended from the platform and walked toward the cage. Vaerith's golden eyes tracked his every movement, but the dragon did not growl at its master. It simply watched, wings still protectively curled around the bars. Thorn stopped a few paces away. "You will not be executed tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "The dragon has claimed you, until I understand why you will remain under guard." He paused, then added in a quieter tone meant only for her, "But do not mistake this for mercy. If you are a thief, I will find out." Seren met his gaze without flinching. "I did not steal anything, Your Majesty," she said calmly. "Then look for the truth before you call me thief again." Thorn studied her for a moment. There was no fear in her eyes, only quiet defiance. He turned to the guards. "Move the cage to the eastern tower, double the guards, and make sure the dragon is not provoked." As the heavy cage was dragged across the courtyard, Verith slowly withdrew its wings, but followed closely its massive body, moving like a living wall beside the prisoner. Seren walked inside the moving cage, the chains around her wrists clinking softly. She glanced down at the burn scar on her palm. The golden glow had faded, but she could still feel a faint warmth beneath the skin. That night, as the moon rose, Lord Veric was already below the palace, feeding old healer records into blue fire. On the last page, Seren's childhood name glowed once before, turning to ash. In the eastern tower, the cage had been placed inside a large stone chamber. Verith had curled itself around the base of the tower, its massive body blocking the only entrance like a living wall of scales and claws. No one could approach without the dragon knowing. Seren sat on the cold stone floor inside the cage, her back resting against the bars. The royal wolf, no, the dragon, had not left her side since the courtyard. Its presence was both comforting and overwhelming. Thorn stood alone on the highest balcony of the palace, staring toward the eastern tower. Verith's dark silhouette was visible, even from this distance, coiled protectively around the structure. His last dragon had not defended the crown. It had chosen the prisoner he had condemned. In the eastern tower, Seren's burn scar warmed beneath the chains. Outside, Verith opened one golden eye and breathed a single word into the night. "Little flame." The eastern tower was quiet, but it was not peaceful. Seren sat on the cold stone floor inside the iron cage, her back resting against the bars. The chains around her wrists had been loosened slightly, but they were still there, a reminder that she remained a prisoner. Verith, the last dragon, lay coiled around the base of the tower like a living fortress. Its obsidian scales rose and fell slowly with each breath, and its golden eyes remained half open, watching the darkness. A soft rustle came from the stairs. 2 guards appeared carrying a tray of food. They stopped when Verith lifted its massive head. The dragon stared at them for a long moment before slowly lowering its head again. The guards placed the tray just inside the threshold and retreated quickly. Before Seren reached for the bread, Verith lowered its head and breathed over the tray. The fruit blackened at the edges. The dragon pushed the bowl away with one careful claw. Seren looked at the blackened fruit, then at the dragon. She did not touch the food. On the highest balcony of the palace, Thorn Draconis did not sleep. He had sent 2 trusted men to the treasury before midnight. Neither had returned. In the eastern tower, Seren finally spoke into the quiet. "Why are you protecting me?" Verith did not answer with words, but it slowly extended one wing and draped it gently over the top of the cage, shielding her from the cold night wind. The gesture was careful, almost tender. Seren stared at the wing above her. Without thinking, she reached up and placed her palm against one of the warm scales. The old burn scar on her hand pulsed faintly. Verith let out a soft breath, almost like a sigh. Far below the palace, Lord Veric stood before a hidden chamber deep in the treasury. Blue flames burned in a brazier as he fed more old records into the fire. His movements were quick and precise. On the last page of one document, Seren's childhood name glowed once before turning to ash. Veric stared at the flames for a long moment. "If the dragon will not let them execute her," he whispered, "then the tower must become her tomb." He turned and walked deeper into the treasury. At the end of a narrow corridor stood an old sealed door. Veric pressed his palm against the stone, and a faint blue light glowed beneath his fingers. The door slowly opened. Inside was a small hidden chamber. Most of the old tapestry on the wall had been burned away. Only two figures remained clear, a child's hand marked with flame, and a wounded dragon lowering its head to her touch. Varric stared at the remaining image for a long time. His expression was unreadable. He closed the door and sealed it once more. In the eastern tower, Seren had finally drifted into a light sleep. Varith's wing remained draped over her cage, protecting her from the wind. But deep in the night, the dragon suddenly lifted its head. Its golden eyes narrowed as it stared toward the distant mountains. A low, sorrowful sound rumbled in its chest. Beneath the palace, the burned tapestry moved. The painted dragon opened one golden eye. And in the eastern tower, Varith answered with a low, warning growl. The sun had barely risen when Dragon King Thorn Draconis descended into the depths of the palace. Two of his most trusted men had not returned from the treasury the night before. Thorn walked through the cold stone corridors with a small group of guards, his silver eyes sharp and alert. The further they went, the heavier the air felt. When they reached the treasury, the heavy doors were sealed from the inside. Thorn placed his palm against the ancient stone and pushed. The doors groaned open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burned parchment. Blue flames still flickered weakly in a brazier at the far end of the chamber. Scattered across the floor were the ashes of old records. Thorn knelt and picked up a half-burned page. The only word still legible was the name Seren. His jaw tightened. He turned to the guards. "Search every corner. If anyone has been down here, I want to know." While the guards searched, Thorn walked deeper into the treasury. At the end of a narrow corridor stood a sealed door he had not seen in many years. The stone was cold, but when he placed his hand on it, a faint blue light pulsed beneath his palm, the same light that had sealed it long ago. The door did not open for him. Thorn stared at it for a long moment before turning away. In the eastern tower, Seren woke to the sound of Varith shifting outside. The dragon's massive body was still coiled around the tower, but its head was raised, golden eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Seren sat up slowly. The chains around her wrists had been removed sometime during the night. She did not know when. Only the iron cage remained. She looked at the burn scar on her palm. It no longer glowed, but she could still feel a faint warmth. Varith lowered its head until one golden eye was level with the bars of the cage. It stared at her for a long time. Then very slowly it nudged the cage door with its snout. The heavy iron creaked but did not open. Seren reached out and placed her hand on the dragon's scales. "I don't know who you think I am," she whispered, "but thank you for staying." Varith let out a low rumble, almost like a purr. Far below, Thorn stood in the treasury, with the burned records in his hand. He had not found his missing men, but he had found enough to know that someone was desperately trying to erase every trace of the girl in the eastern tower. He turned to one of the remaining guards. "Bring Lord Varric to me. Now." Back in the tower, Seren had managed to stand. She tested the strength of the cage bars, though she knew it was useless. Varith watched her quietly. After a while, the dragon slowly uncoiled part of its body and shifted closer to the cage. It lowered one wing slightly, creating a small space between its body and the tower wall, almost like offering shelter. Seren hesitated, then carefully stepped out of the cage and into the narrow space between the dragon and the stone. The warmth from Varith's scales was immediate and comforting. She sat down with her back against the dragon's side. For the first time since she had been thrown into the cage, Seren felt something close to safety. Varith remained perfectly still, its breathing slow and steady as if guarding something precious. Hours later, Thorn stood before Lord Varric in the throne room. The treasury keeper kept his expression calm, but there was a tightness around his eyes. "You sent men into the treasury without informing me, Your Majesty," Varric said smoothly. "I would have accompanied them." Thorn studied him in silence for a moment. "Two of my men are missing," he said, "and someone has been burning records that mention a girl named Seren." Varric's face remained composed. Old records can be dangerous if misunderstood, my king. Sometimes it is better to let the past remain buried. Thorn's silver eyes turned cold. Bring me every document that still exists regarding the girl in the Eastern Tower, and if I find that even one more page has been burned, I will hold you personally responsible. Varric bowed deeply. As you command. But as he left the throne room, his expression darkened. In the Eastern Tower, as night fell, once more Varith suddenly lifted its head. Its golden eyes narrowed toward the distant mountains. A low, warning growl rumbled from its chest. Seren sat up, sensing the change in the dragon's mood. "What is it?" she whispered. Varith did not answer, but its body tensed and its claws dug slightly into the stone. Far below the palace in the hidden chamber, the burned tapestry had moved again. The painted dragon's golden eye was now fully open, and from the darkness of that sealed room, something ancient began to stir, something that had been waiting for a very long time. In the Eastern Tower, Varith let out another low growl, louder this time. It was no longer just protecting Seren. It was preparing for something. The night was unnaturally still. In the Eastern Tower, Varith had not moved from its position, coiled around the stone structure. The dragon's massive body formed a living barrier, but its golden eyes remained alert, scanning the darkness beyond the tower walls. Every so often, it would let out a low, warning rumble that vibrated through the stone. Seren sat with her back against the dragon's warm scales. She had stopped trying to sleep. Something in the air felt wrong, heavier, more watchful. The old burn scar on her palm was warm again, pulsing gently like a second heartbeat. Varith suddenly lifted its head. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the wind. A deep growl built in its chest. Seren stood up slowly. "What is it?" she whispered. The dragon did not answer with sound. Instead, it shifted its body slightly, creating a narrow gap between its wing and the tower wall, just enough for her to see outside. Far below in the shadows of the palace grounds, several figures moved silently toward the tower. They wore dark cloaks and carried no torches. Their movements were too coordinated to be ordinary guards. Varith's growl deepened. Seren pressed herself against the dragon's side. "They're coming for me," she said quietly. Varith's golden eyes narrowed. It slowly uncoiled part of its body and spread one wing wider, creating a thicker shield around the tower entrance. Inside the palace, Dragon King Thorn Draconis was walking through the corridors when a young guard rushed toward him. "Your Majesty," the guard said breathlessly. "Lord Varric has left the treasury. He took several men with him. Armed men. They were heading toward the Eastern Tower." Thorn's silver eyes turned cold. He did not ask for confirmation. He simply turned and strode toward the Eastern Tower, with long, purposeful steps, several guards falling in behind him. In the Eastern Tower, the cloaked figures had reached the base. One of them pulled out a small vial filled with a dark liquid and threw it against Varith's scales. The liquid hissed and smoked upon contact, but the dragon barely reacted. It simply lowered its head and released a powerful stream of dark flame that forced the attackers to scatter. Seren watched in stunned silence. She had never seen a dragon breathe fire up close before. The heat was intense, but it did not touch her. Varith's wing remained firmly wrapped around the tower, protecting her completely. One of the cloaked men shouted something, and the others began preparing another attack. This time they carried long spears with glowing tips, weapons designed to pierce dragon scales. Varith roared. The sound shook the entire tower. Seren covered her ears, but she did not look away. She could feel the dragon's rage and its determination to keep her safe. Just as the attackers prepared to strike again, a new voice cut through the night. "Enough." Dragon King Thorn appeared at the edge of the courtyard, flanked by his guards. His silver eyes burned with fury as he took in the scene. The cloaked men, the smoking liquid on the ground, and his dragon standing protectively around the tower. The attackers froze. Thorn's voice was low and dangerous. "Drop your weapons. Now." One of the men hesitated, then lunged forward with his spear. Varith moved faster than anyone expected. Its tail swept out and knocked the man off his feet. The spear clattered to the ground. The remaining attackers quickly dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Thorn walked closer, his gaze fixed on the tower. "Seren," he called out. "Are you unharmed?" From within the dragon's protective wing, her voice came back steady. "I am." Thorn's eyes flicked to Varith. The dragon met his gaze, but did not move its wing away from the tower. For the first time, Thorn did not try to command the dragon to stand down. Instead, he looked at the captured men. "Take them to the dungeons," he ordered his guards. "I will deal with them personally." As the attackers were dragged away, Thorn remained standing in the courtyard, staring up at the tower where his last dragon still shielded the lowborn girl he had once condemned. He did not speak for a long time. Finally, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, "My dragon has chosen its side." In the eastern tower, Seren sat back down against Varith's warm scales. The dragon's wing remained protectively over her. She looked at the burn scar on her palm. It was glowing brighter now. Varith lowered its head until its golden eye was level with her once more. Seren whispered into the dark, "Who am I to you?" The dragon did not answer, but far below the palace in the hidden chamber, the burned tapestry had moved again. The painted dragon's golden eye was now fully open, and from the darkness something old and powerful began to wake. In the eastern tower, Varith suddenly lifted its head and let out a deep, resonant roar that echoed across the entire palace, a sound filled with warning, recognition, and ancient claim. Thorn Draconis stood alone in the courtyard, listening to his last dragon's roar. For the first time, he felt truly uncertain about what he was ruling. And for the first time, he wondered if the girl in the tower was not the threat, but the key to everything he was losing. The roar of Varith still echoed across the palace long after the attackers had been dragged away. Dragon King Thorn Draconis stood alone in the courtyard, staring up at the eastern tower. His last dragon remained coiled around the structure like a living wall, its massive wings half spread as if daring anyone else to approach. Thorn had not moved for several minutes. He had seen the way Varith protected the girl. He had seen the way the dragon's golden eyes burned with something far deeper than simple instinct. This was not the behavior of a beast defending territory. This was something older, something personal. He turned to one of the remaining guards. "Double the watch around the eastern tower. No one approaches without my direct order." The guard bowed and hurried away. Thorn lingered a moment longer, his silver eyes fixed on the dark silhouette of Varith. Then he turned and walked back toward the palace, his expression unreadable. In the eastern tower, Seren sat with her back against Varith's warm scales. The dragon's wing was still draped over the cage like a protective canopy. The night air was cold, but she no longer felt it. She looked at the burn scar on her palm. It had stopped glowing, but she could still feel a faint warmth pulsing beneath the skin. Varith lowered its head until one golden eye was level with her. The dragon studied her quietly for a long time. Seren reached out slowly and placed her hand against the dragon's snout. "You've been protecting me since the beginning," she whispered. "Haven't you?" Varith let out a low rumble. It did not pull away from her touch. Seren closed her eyes. "I don't remember you," she said softly. "But I think I should." The dragon remained still, but its breathing grew slower, almost gentle. Far below the palace, Lord Varric stood in the hidden chamber once more. The burned tapestry had returned to stillness, but the golden eye of the painted dragon was now fully open and staring at him. Varric's face was pale. He had not expected the dragon to fight so fiercely for the girl. He had not expected Thorn to personally intervene. He turned to the two cloaked men standing behind him. "The tower is too well protected now," he said coldly. "We cannot reach her directly, not while the dragon remains." One of the men stepped forward. "What do we do, my lord?" Varric's eyes narrowed. "We do not need to kill her with our own hands," he said. "If we can make the Dragon King believe she is a threat to him, he will do it for us." He looked back at the tapestry. The old blood still answers her. We must make sure the king sees that as danger, not salvation. He turned away from the chamber. Prepare the next move. We strike at the heart of what the king still values. In the eastern tower, as dawn approached, Seren finally allowed herself to rest. She leaned against Varith's side, and for the first time since she had been thrown into the cage, she felt a fragile sense of safety. Varith remained awake, its golden eyes fixed on the horizon. The dragon's massive body was tense, as if it could sense that the danger had not passed. It had only changed form. Far away in the throne room, Thorn Draconis sat alone on his throne. The first light of dawn was beginning to touch the tall windows. He held the half-burned document with Seren's name in his hand. His silver eyes were dark with thought. He had ordered the girl's execution. He had believed the evidence presented to him, and now his last dragon was risking everything to protect her. Thorn closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his voice was quiet but firm as he spoke to the empty throne room. Bring the girl to me at midday, and make sure the dragon allows it. He stood up slowly. I will speak with her myself. In the eastern tower, Varith suddenly lifted its head. Its golden eyes narrowed as it stared toward the palace. A low, warning growl rumbled in its chest. Seren opened her eyes. She could feel it too. A shift in the air. Something was coming, and this time it would not be cloaked men in the dark. It would be the Dragon King himself. Varith slowly uncoiled part of its body from around the tower. It did not move away from Seren, but it positioned itself more protectively, as if preparing for a different kind of threat, one that wore a crown. In the distance, the first rays of sunlight touched the highest spires of the palace, and somewhere deep beneath the stone, the painted dragon in the burned tapestry continued to watch with its single golden eye, waiting. Midday arrived under a sky heavy with clouds. The eastern tower stood silent as guards approached cautiously. Varith had uncoiled enough to allow passage, but the dragon remained close, its golden eyes watching every movement with sharp intensity. Seren stepped out of the iron cage for the first time since her imprisonment. Her wrists were still bound by lighter chains, but the guards did not touch her. They kept their distance, clearly aware that the last dragon would not tolerate any harm. She walked between them, her simple dress torn and dirty, her dark hair falling loosely around her face. Yet she moved with quiet dignity, her head held high. Varith followed a few steps behind its massive body, casting a long shadow over the group. The dragon's presence alone ensured no one dared speak against her. They brought her to the throne room. The great hall was nearly empty. Only a few trusted guards stood along the walls. Dragon King Thorn Draconis sat on the throne, but he rose the moment she entered. His silver eyes studied her carefully as she approached. The royal wolf, no, the dragon, remained a few paces behind her, watchful but calm. Thorn gestured for the guards to leave. They obeyed quickly, leaving only the three of them, the king, the prisoner, and the last dragon. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Thorn stepped down from the dais and walked toward her. He stopped, a respectful distance away. I have seen the records, he said. His voice was low, controlled. The debt was forged. Your family was never guilty of treason. Someone wanted your bloodline erased. Seren looked at him steadily. And yet you ordered my execution, she replied quietly. Thorn did not flinch. I believed the evidence presented to me. I was wrong. He glanced at Varith, who had lowered its head slightly, watching the exchange. My dragon has never defied me before, Thorn continued. Not once in all the years I have ruled. Until you. He took one more step closer. Tell me the truth, Seren. Why does Varith protect you? What are you to my last dragon? Seren looked at the massive creature beside her. Varith's golden eyes met hers with a depth that made her chest tighten. I don't know, she said honestly. But when I touch the scar on my palm, I feel something, a memory I cannot reach. Thorn studied her for a long time. Then he made a decision. He reached out and gently took her chained wrists. With a small key from his belt, he unlocked the manacles and let them fall to the floor. Seren stared at her freed hands. "You are no longer a prisoner," Thorn said. "But you are not yet free. There are still those who want you gone. Lord Relic is one of them. I believe he is working with others to keep the truth buried." He looked at Varith. "And my dragon seems to believe you are worth protecting with its life." Seren rubbed her wrists, feeling the absence of the chains for the first time in days. "What do you want from me, Your Majesty?" Thorn's silver eyes softened slightly. "I want the truth, and I want to know why my last dragon chose you over its king." He gestured toward a side door. "You will stay in the East Wing under my protection, but I ask that you allow me to speak with you again. There is much we both need to understand." Seren nodded once. As she turned to leave with Varith following closely, Thorn spoke again. "Seren." She paused. "If anyone tries to harm you," he said, his voice low and firm, "they will answer to me." In the shadows of a hidden corridor, Lord Relic watched through a narrow slit in the stone. His face was cold. He had seen enough. The girl was no longer just a threat to his power. She was becoming a threat to the very foundation of the dragon throne. He turned and disappeared into the darkness, his hand clutching the moonstone charm that had once belonged to Vespera's allies. The game had changed, and the next move would be his. In the eastern wing, Seren stood by the window with Varith beside her. The dragon lowered its head and gently nudged her palm with its snout. The burn scar glowed softly once more. Seren closed her eyes. She still did not remember everything, but she was beginning to feel that the past was no longer buried. It was waking up, and it had come for her. The eastern wing had become a sanctuary wrapped in tension. Seren stood by the tall window, watching the palace grounds below. The chains were gone from her wrists, but the feeling of being caged had not entirely left her. Varith lay curled near the doorway, its massive body, a living barrier between her and the rest of the world. The dragon's golden eyes never fully closed. Thorn visited every evening. He came without fanfare, without guards when he could manage it. Each time he brought new records from the archives, fragments of truth slowly pieced together. He sat across from her at the small table, speaking in low, measured tones. Tonight was no different. "The debt was not only forged," Thorn said, placing another parchment between them. "It was designed to erase your entire bloodline. Someone wanted the true lunar line to disappear forever." Seren looked at the document. Her name was written there in faded ink alongside words that had been crossed out and rewritten multiple times. She traced one of the lines with her fingertip. "Why?" she asked quietly. "What did my family do that frightened them so much?" Thorn was silent for a moment. "They did not do anything," he said. "They simply existed, and their existence threatened the way this kingdom has been ruled, through fear and control instead of the old bond." Varith lifted its head at those words. The dragon let out a low rumble, almost like agreement. Thorn glanced at the dragon, then back at Seren. "My father taught me that dragons must be ruled by strength. That compassion made them weak. I believed him, until Varith chose you." He reached across the table and gently turned her hand palm up, revealing the old burn scar. It glowed faintly under his touch. "This scar," he said, "it appeared the night Varith first protected you. My dragon remembers something you do not." Seren looked at the scar, then at Thorn. "I was a child," she said slowly. "There was a fire in the lower city. I remember smoke and pain, and something large breathing warmth over me." Varith moved closer. The dragon lowered its head until its snout was inches from her palm. A soft, warm breath washed over the scar. The glow brightened for a moment, then faded. Thorn watched the interaction with quiet intensity. "He remembers you," he said. "You saved him when the court tried to put him down as a weakling. You were only a child, but you hid him and cared for his wounds." Seren's breath caught. I thought it was a dream." Thorn's voice softened. It was not. He did not pull his hand away from hers. For the first time, the silence between them felt different. Not dangerous, but charged with something deeper. Outside the chamber, hidden in the shadows of the corridor, Lord Varick watched through a narrow slit in the stone wall. His face was cold with calculation. He had seen enough. The girl was awakening the old bond. If she was allowed to continue, the Dragon King would no longer need him. The old ways of fear and control would crumble. Varick slipped away into the darkness. Later that night, as the moon climbed higher, Seren could not sleep. She sat on the balcony with Varith beside her. The dragon's wing was half curled around her, shielding her from the cold wind. Suddenly, Varith stiffened. A low growl built in its chest. Seren stood up. In the distance near the treasury, a faint blue light flickered once before vanishing. Varith's growl grew louder. At the same moment, the burn scar on Seren's palm flared hot. She gasped and clutched her hand. Thorn appeared moments later, moving quickly through the corridor with several guards. When he reached the balcony, his silver eyes immediately found hers. "Varick has been seen near the old vaults," he said. "He is trying to destroy the last remaining records." He looked at Varith, then back at Seren. "I am going down there. Stay here with the dragon." Seren stepped forward. "No," she said firmly. "If this concerns me, I will not hide. Not anymore." Thorn studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Stay close to me." Together with Varith, following like a living shadow, they descended into the depths of the palace. In the hidden chamber beneath the treasury, Lord Varick stood before the burned tapestry. Blue flames danced in his hands as he prepared to destroy the final piece of evidence. The painted dragon's golden eyes stared back at him. Varick smiled coldly. "You should have stayed, forgotten little flame." He raised his hand to cast the spell. Behind him, the heavy stone door began to open. The heavy stone door groaned open. Dragon King Thorn stepped into the hidden chamber, first silver eyes, blazing with cold fury. Seren followed close behind her hand, resting lightly on Varith's scaled shoulder. The last dragon filled the corridor behind them, its massive body barely fitting through the entrance, golden eyes locked on Lord Varick. Varick stood frozen before the burned tapestry, blue flames still dancing in his palm. For the first time, his composed mask cracked. Shock, then fear flashed across his face as he saw the girl he had tried to erase, standing beside the Dragon King, protected by the very dragon he had once tried to kill. "Varick," Thorn said, his voice low and dangerous. "Explain yourself." Varick forced a smile, though his hand trembled slightly. "Your Majesty, I was merely cleaning old records. Some truths are better left in the past." Varith let out a deep, earth-shaking growl that rattled the stone walls. Blue flames flickered and died in Varick's palm as the dragon took one heavy step forward. Seren stepped out from behind Varith. Her voice was quiet but carried through the chamber with unexpected strength. "You burned my name," she said. "You tried to make me disappear. Why?" Varick's eyes darted between them. He backed up until he hit the wall. "Because the old ways are dead," he spat. "Dragons should fear us. Kings should rule through strength, not compassion. If the true lunar bloodline returns, everything we built on fear will crumble." He looked at Thorn. "You are becoming the perfect king," Cold, Powerful feared. And then this girl appeared. One look from her and your last dragon turned against you. She is a threat to the throne itself. Thorn's silver eyes narrowed. "She is not the threat," he said. "You are." Varick laughed bitterly. He raised his hand, and dark blue flames erupted from the floor, forming a barrier between them. The flames carried the same poisonous magic he had used on the attackers earlier. "You still don't understand," Varick shouted. "I have spent years making sure the old bond dies with Varith. If she awakens fully, the dragons will no longer obey fear. They will obey her." Varith roared and slammed its massive body against the blue flame barrier. The flames flickered but held. Seren felt the burn scar on her palm flare hot. Without thinking, she stepped forward and placed her hand against the barrier. The blue flames hissed where her skin touched them. A soft, golden light spread from the scar across her palm, pushing back the dark magic. The barrier cracked. Varric's eyes widened in terror. "No, it's impossible. You were just a child." Seren looked at him calmly. "I remember now," she said. "I found Varith wounded in the mountains. I hid him. I cared for him when your men tried to kill him because he was too gentle." The golden light from her palm grew brighter. The blue flames shattered completely. Varith surged forward with a triumphant roar. Varric screamed as the dragon's massive claw pinned him against the wall, not killing him but holding him helpless. Thorn stepped forward and looked down at his former advisor with cold contempt. "You will answer for your crimes," he said. "Every record you burned, every lie you told, every attempt you made to erase her." He turned to Seren. The golden light from her palm slowly faded, but the warmth remained. She looked at Thorn, breathing hard. "I am not here to take your throne," she said. "I never wanted power. I only wanted to live without chains." Thorn reached out and gently took her hand, the one with the glowing scar. "You will never wear chains again," he said. "Not while I rule." Varith released Varric, who collapsed to the floor. The dragon moved to stand beside Seren, lowering its head so she could rest her hand on its snout. In that moment, golden light flowed between the girl, the dragon, and the king, a bond older than fear, older than thrones. But as the light faded, a new whisper rose from the shadows of the chamber. From the burned tapestry, the painted dragon's golden eye glowed once more, and a single line of fresh black ink appeared on the wall beside it. "The last dragon will die before the true Luna can rise." Varith suddenly staggered, a low, pained sound escaping its throat. A thin crack appeared across one of its obsidian scales. Seren's eyes widened in horror. "Varith." The last dragon looked at her with ancient sadness. The final battle for the old bond had only just begun. The full moon had passed, and spring had finally come to the Dragon Kingdom. The grand courtyard where Seren had once stood in chains was now filled with blooming, night-blooming roses and soft golden lanterns. The entire court had gathered not for judgment but for celebration. Seren walked down the wide stone aisle in a simple yet elegant gown of deep silver and black, the colors of the last dragon. Her dark hair was loose, the old burn scar on her palm now glowing softly like a living ember. She no longer wore chains. She no longer hid her eyes. Varith walked beside her, the last dragon's massive obsidian scales gleaming under the moonlight. The crack across its scales had healed, though a thin silver line remained, a mark of the battle it had fought for her. At the end of the aisle stood Dragon King Thorn Draconis. He wore no heavy crown tonight, only a simple circlet of black iron and gold. His silver eyes never left Seren as she approached. The man who had once ordered her execution now looked at her with open, unguarded devotion. When she reached him, Thorn took both her hands in his. Before the entire court, he spoke clearly and without hesitation. "I once condemned an innocent woman because I trusted fear more than truth," he said. "Tonight I stand before you all to correct that wrong. Seren is no thief. She is no lowborn criminal. She is the last of the true Luna bloodline, the one my dragon chose over fear, over power, over tradition." He looked into her eyes. "Seren, you saved what I had almost lost. You reminded me that dragons do not serve through terror. They serve through trust. I ask you not as a king, but as a man who does not deserve you. Will you stand with me as my queen, as my mate, as the heart this kingdom has been missing for far too long?" Seren's voice was steady, warm, and strong. "I will," she said. "I choose you, Thorn. Not because of bloodlines or dragons or thrones. I choose the man who learned to listen when his last dragon spoke. I choose the king who chose truth over convenience." Thorn pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply in front of the entire court. Golden light from the dragon bond and soft silver light from the true Luna bloodline merged and exploded, outward bathing the courtyard in warmth and hope. Varith lifted its massive head and roared, a sound of triumph, of healing, of a new beginning. The other dragons, still living in the distant mountains, answered from afar, their voices joining in a chorus that shook the night sky. In the months that followed, the kingdom changed. The old laws of fear were rewritten. Dragons were no longer forced into obedience through pain and control. They returned slowly, drawn by the restored bond of trust. Lord Varick and his remaining allies were exiled, their names struck from the records. Seren walked the halls not as a servant but as queen. She brought healing knowledge from the lower city and combined it with the ancient ways of the true Luna. Varith remained her constant companion, often seen flying above the palace with her on its back. One quiet spring evening, Seren and Thorn stood together on the highest balcony overlooking the kingdom. Varith rested nearby, its massive body curled protectively around the tower. The dragon's golden eyes were peaceful. Thorn wrapped his arms around her from behind his hand, resting gently over her slightly rounded belly. "Our child will never know chains," he murmured against her hair. "They will grow up knowing that strength is not in fear, but in the bonds we choose to protect." Seren smiled and leaned back against him. "And they will know that even the lowest among us can save a kingdom," she whispered, "and that a dragon's heart can remember a kindness from a child." Varith let out a soft, contented rumble. The last dragon had found its purpose again. The Dragon King had found his queen, and the kingdom had finally learned to value what it had once tried to destroy. In the heart of the dragon throne, a strong, steady flame burned bright, one that would never be allowed to die again.